So, I was born in Doncaster, and in 1946, so that places me at 77 years of age. So I'm quite an aging artist. I went to Leeds College of Art to do fine art, where it was very exciting, very interesting, Dadaist, surreal college. Yoko Ono was there, and Hockney would pop in, and so on. And then from there, I went into teaching. I went to become a teacher in secondary schools in Doncaster, and then into Retford in Nottinghamshire. And then I went to work for the Arts Council. I was running a project called the Arts in Schools, where I was putting combinations of really international artists into schools with children, working in a very interactive way. And I had a massive budget to do that. And that was and that was when the national curriculum was being developed. From the Arts Council, I got a job at Bretton Hall College, where I taught visual language, I taught inter-arts for many years, and loved it there. That was a very exciting place to teach and to be. I was always producing work all this time. By the way, when I was at Leeds, I was a performance artist, and I was making film and doing very experimental work. And then I was a painter. All the time I was teaching, I was actually still making art, still wanting to make art, still very interested in art philosophy, in how art can heal and change people's lives, where art comes from. I was very interested in the arts of other cultures, of Native Americans, of Aborigines, the arts of Asia, of India, Pakistan. I went out to Pakistan and lectured there for a little while. So after Bretton Hall, it was subsumed into Leeds University, fine art. I was not comfortable with the kind of elitism of that. Bretton had been very much about practice, and I think Leeds was much more to do with theoretical, less so in practice. So I had always been really interested and had worked with people with mental health problems. So in about 2000, I founded a charity in Huddersfield called Artists in Mind. I went to America and went to see something called the Living Museum in New York, which was a massive psychiatric institution which had an art school that this psychiatrist had set up. Called the Living Museum. I went to Amsterdam, and there were people with disability and mental health problems producing art and selling it through galleries and shops. So I was kind of looking for a model, because I knew that art had a capacity to heal, to reconnect people who were in some ways disconnected from themselves, the true selves, or whatever. And it all fitted in with my interest in symbolism and Jung and so on. You know, this kind of psychology of art and what art was. So I founded AIM. We had studios for 30 acutely ill service users. We gave them free materials, mentoring. We exhibited them. It was a very joyful place to be and changed people's lives. Excuse me. At the same time, we also went to work at Rampton High Secure Hospital as an arts facilitator, and also as a chaplain. I was a Quaker, so I was both. We were the two kind of tenets of what I did there was being silent and finding yourself, and making art. So I worked with the patients, and I managed to get lots of money, and we brought sculptors in who came into the hospital and made big sculptures, and so on and so forth. And then after AIM folded, it was a shame, it lasted nearly 20 years, I decided to set up my own studio at last and make my own work. And then I started to get really interested in ceramics, and I also make drawings, big drawings called flow maps. But my ceramics was kind of evolved, and I started to look at what were really essential symbols. Jung talked about how Human beings have always made symbols. They make sense of the world through symbols. And we have symbols, the most beautiful symbols in this country, from the Celtic, from the Ice Age, from the Neolithic Age. And there's something quite mysterious about it, because people don't know what the spiral means, but it's such a beautiful form. It's a creating form. It's about the stars, the planets, or life and death. And I started to incorporate these into my work. And I then was asked to become artist in residence at Creswell Crags, which is in Derbyshire, which is a series of caves with Ice Age and what are called medieval atropaic witch marks carved in the caves. And then I took on the symbols of that place and incorporated them into my work in a kind of, I suppose, visual poetry. And that developed and grew, and my forms grew. And then I started bringing in other spiritual forms, like the Kabbalah from Judaism, and certain forms of religious icon from Catholicism, as I was born a Catholic. And I started to develop these into the kind of work you see around here. So obviously there's a very strong element of arts and health in all I do, not only in terms of what I've done professionally, in working in hospitals and prisons and setting up charities, but also in myself, because I feel that if it wasn't for art, I would be lost. So in a way, many artists are self-healing. This is our therapy. This is what we're doing. We're building things like this. We're making things, tangible, physical things in the world that help us. And I have ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is a neurological illness. And I think that, the arts are just so important to me, to help me through the day, to help me to find meaning, to help me just find some. I come in here. This is my creative sanctuary. I come in here and I can be myself, and I can explore the symbols and the ideas. So this symbol here is an ascending female spirit. That's Ice Age. We're talking before the Neolithic. These are Neolithic forms. This is from Northumberland, a symbol from Northumberland. And what I do is I'm writing visual poems of all these amazing symbols in my work. And in some ways, the colours I use, I am very spontaneous in the way I work. I let things evolve very, very, very quickly. So, some of this work is very organic, like this piece here, because one of the things I was interested in was Taoism. Now, the Taoists, who were Chinese philosophers, Tai Chi comes out of Taoism. Taoism is about flow and fluidity. And so I always felt that good health was about flowing, was about being in the flow, that people will say, get into the flow, or, great jazz musicians will be in the flow, really improvise and be in the flow. So I got really interested in water and the flow of water and fluidity, and that became really important in my work. This idea of that health, good health, is about flowing, because when we're blocked, when we're disconnected, we are unwell, we're not well. So being in the flow, so going and doing a dance class, doing Tai Chi, making ceramics, painting, puts us into the flow. The brain, there's been a lot of work done on this. The brain, when it's actually being created, works completely differently to any other time. The brain connects. It's a particular state of mind when there is no future, there's no past. You're in the moment because you're making that painting. you're making that pot, you're writing that poem, you're playing that music. It's being in the flow, in the moment. And that is avowedly Taoist. So a lot of this is also to do with health, with the good health of people. And it's all sort of began to grow into this work that I'm doing. So this drawing was when I was artist in residence at Creswell Crags, and it represents some of the symbols from within the caves and the water that runs through the caves or either side. And so each piece of work has significance. These pieces are being evolved, being made at the moment. They're incense holders with symbolism from the Neolithic. That's from India. That is the ascending female spirit that I talked about. Archaeologists have verified that. They say it's either a flying bird or an ascending female spirit. That's a Neolithic symbol for water. Really interesting, cross-hatching, which is water. And again, that's a cup and ring stone. One of those mysterious symbols which is about cosmology, or it's about life and death, or it's that, we don't know what it means. It's just beautiful. So I incorporate these things into what I do. I make some of the work I make over here are what I call Qi flow, which these little forms here. So Qi means breath in Chinese, and I just wanted to make these lovely little objects as though they had been discovered somewhere, as though they were found. I brought in, incorporated all the symbols, as you can see again, the symbol of that. This is a symbol from Ilkley Moor, which is actually a sun symbol. It's carved up on the moors in Ilkley. And it is actually a swastika, but it's not, because of course the swastika was a sun symbol. It was used in Buddhism. The Navajo used them in their ceremonies and so on. So what we need to do is to reclaim that beautiful sun form, which is what I was doing. These pieces here are what I call sea flowers. It's a series of, almost as though these forms have arisen out of the sea. And I've also incorporated glass into these, so it's a lot of glass. The pieces up here are what I call mandalas. A mandala is a circular form which is used in meditation. In Hinduism, you have a mandala, you look at it and then you go beyond it. Like I was saying earlier about how the symbol takes you beyond. So I made a series of circular mandalas. I suppose in a way, I am really interested in mysticism, and for many years, I suppose it comes from my Catholic background, but I was also interested in Sufism and Hinduism, and Sufism, of course, is mystical Islam, and it's always come into my work. So I became interested in a woman called Hildegard of Bingen, who was I think she was a 12th, 13th century nun who was a visionary, and she was a painter. She received, and a musician. She wrote the first opera, and she lived on the River Rhine. And I went to her convent, and it's just so inspiring. The woman is just amazing. Her dreams, her visions were in her paintings. So I've always felt that art was about reconnecting, was about putting a mark on the surface in order to go beyond to some deeper understanding. So there's a difference between signs and symbols. Signs are illustrating, they're telling you to do something. Go right, don't come here, don't enter. Symbols allude to something deeper, beyond themselves, something transcendent. and it always has been the case. That's always been something that I've really been interested in, the idea that somehow art takes you beyond itself. So it's a bit like art and ritual. Ritual has always been something that art has used, artists. And of course, the word art, there is no such word for art amongst the Native Americans, the Aborigines in the East. It was just something people did. It was natural. It was just absolutely organic to an expression of their lives. So art is a construct, a Western construct, nothing to do with the rest of the world. And the Western art has always been arrogant. We've always put people down, and other cultures, and thought them primitive or thought them not worthy. I know I wrote a chapter for a book about the arts of South Asia, and how we took from South Asia. The Paisley design is a beautiful Islamic design that we took, and then commentaries in this country would say that the painters of India and Pakistan and Bangladesh were primitive. They just took from the West, but they have their own wonderful historic traditions. And I was involved with an organisation called Shisha for many years, and we were sending work over to South Asia and bringing work over here. Massive shows from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and exhibiting them in Manchester and Liverpool and so on. And there was a big exchange of ideas. So I think in a way we've got to be very careful in the West that we're not so presumptuous, that we think we know what art is and nobody else knows what art is. I really abhor that and have worked against that. And that's the same for so-called people with so-called mental illness. There is a genre of art called outsider art. It was founded by somebody called Jean de Buffy, a French painter, and he got really interested in the art of coming out of the asylums, the old asylums of Europe. And there was a psychiatrist called Prinzhorn, and what he did was he collected the artwork from all of the institutions. There was no art therapy then. There was no therapy. There was hardly any drug interventions. But many of the patients were spontaneously making art. And this was defined as outsider art. Art which was beyond. People were making art not for reasons, for outer reasons, but for inner reasons. And this whole genre influenced so many, Andre Breton and so on, the Surrealists, all took up this interest. So there are many types of art that are not elitist, that are not going to be exhibited in the Hayward Gallery, but are so beautiful and important and significant. So that's been, I suppose in a way, it was quite I was taking quite a radical viewpoint about what art is, that it should be something pure and honest and spiritual, and that art is something that reconnects us. It reconnects us with something essential. So when people are ill, I wrote a chapter for a book. Creativity is the immune system of the mind and the source of the mythic. So creativity, when you become physically ill, the immune system kicks in and it sorts out and fights the disease or the infections. When there is disconnection in the brain, in the psyche, given a chance, I believe, creativity will kick in and help to redefine and reconnect that person with who they really are. To be honest, I have seen transformations in both the work in studios and in hospitals where patients have, through art, have become much more self-aware, self-realized, confident, feeling somehow that they have a language that they can express themselves in. And self-esteem grows. People I know at AIM said they didn't, it sounds very dramatic, but didn't commit suicide because art gave them meaning. And it's this art and meaning is so powerful. We've been doing it since the cave of our cave dwellers, and we're doing it now. except we make art too elitist. We place it on a pedestal, and we tell children, oh, you're not very good at art. I mean, we deny the natural instincts and processes that people have. And so for people's well-being, they think, oh, I can't do art, which is ridiculous, because everyone. Joseph Beuys, really famous German artist, said that everyone's an artist. So in a way, it's true, potentially, but people have got to be given the chance. And I think that what I've been doing all my life, in my teaching and in my work in mental health, I've been making what we call creative sanctuaries. A creative sanctuary is a place where you come, where you're loved, where you're trusted, where you're given complete freedom to be who you are and to develop a language, a visual language. We're talking about visual art. And those creative sanctuaries were what I produce in hospitals, in Huddersfield, in my classroom, in the studios that I worked in, and people grow in that. You don't impose your values on people, you let them grow within their own values. They discover their own pathway. There's this idea that the soul, that's something that people believe in, has an image. And we're born with that image. And we have to live out of that image. But we get sidetracked. We don't realize that somehow there is some kind of purpose for us. It might be to be a great gardener, a good friend, a good parent. But for a lot of people who are in the arts, they have to become an artist. It's almost something that they're destined to do. But they need to be given the chance. And I'm afraid the present situation with arts in schools is really poor. We're not giving children the chance to make music and make art and dance and write creative poetry. And it's a shame. It's an aberration, I think, of responsibility to our children. Not that they'll all become artists, but that they will help them to become balanced, healthy human beings. So this has been the thing I've been involved in all my life, is working towards this, trying to point out that art is something essential to man, that it's what we do. We've always done it, we will always do it. And despite artificial intelligence, we will still do it. We will still make things, we will still construct things, we will still carve and paint and sculpt and write poetry, and for goodness sake, it's just so important, these things.